Welcome back to HOA. Karen gets denied. She said appeal denied, and I said show me the record. Stephanie waved an attorney invoice and screamed that legal costs were not up for debate. I do not care what you were told at move-in, she yelled, her voice cutting across the parking lot like a siren. The bright tow warning sticker on my windshield was still warm to the touch, and the tow truck was idling 15 feet away with the driver leaning against the cab, arms crossed, waiting for her signal. I had 30 seconds to prove I was not in violation or my car was going on the hook, and she knew it. My name is Alex Carter. I work as a community event staffer in Milwaukee, which means I know how crowds and meetings actually work, and I know when someone is running a hustle. I live in Stonehaven Community Association, a development where the committee micromanages everything and calls it standards. Stephanie Jackson is the fines and enforcement coordinator, and she brags about collections like she is hitting quarterly sales targets. She has a megaphone she uses for mailbox announcements, a badge clip with a blank face on her belt, and a stopwatch she pulls out when she wants you to know time is running out. The sticker on my car said I had been parked in a fire lane for more than 2 hours. I had not. I had been parked in my assigned guest spot for 20 minutes while I unloaded groceries. But Stephanie was already holding up her phone, showing the tow driver a photo with a timestamp that made no sense, and she was talking fast, trying to close the deal before I could pull out my own receipts. I take care of a disabled sibling, and towing or access harassment would be a crisis. My brother depends on me for transport to his appointments, and if my car got impounded, we would miss his next check-in and lose the slot. Stephanie knew that. She had asked about my family situation during a neighborhood meeting 6 months ago, and I had been stupid enough to answer. The tow vendor wants authorization now, and Stephanie is trying to rush the hook before I can show proof. She turned to the driver and said, "He has been warned multiple times, and he refuses to comply. I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry. That is not a suggestion. That is policy." The driver shifted his weight and glanced at me, and I saw the first crack in her plan. He did not want to be part of whatever this was. I pulled out my phone and opened my photos. "I have a timestamp picture of my car in the guest spot from 18 minutes ago," I said, keeping my voice level. "The fire lane is on the other side of the building." Stephanie did not even look at my screen. She waved her hand like she was swatting a fly and said, "I am calling management and I am going to be dramatic about it." She pulled out her own phone, turned her back, and started talking loud enough for the driver and the couple on the porch across the lot to hear. "Yes, this is Stephanie Jackson from Stonehaven. We have a repeat offender, and he is refusing to move his vehicle. I need authorization to proceed with the tow immediately." I looked at the driver. He was already walking back to his truck, shaking his head. "Lady," he said, "I am not hooking a car without clear proof it is in the wrong spot. Show me the fire lane and show me the timestamp or I am leaving." Stephanie spun around, her face red, and pointed at me like I had orchestrated the whole thing. "This is obstruction," she said. "I am documenting this, and you are going to receive a certified letter demanding fees and pretending a guideline is law." The tow truck rolled out of the lot, and Stephanie stood there with her phone still in her hand, breathing hard. I did not say anything. I just walked past her, peeled the sticker off my windshield, and went inside. But I kept the sticker, because something about the way she had moved so fast, the way she had that photo ready, the way she had tried to bully the driver into skipping the verification step, all of it felt rehearsed. And that night, I could not stop thinking about it. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started going through the Stonehaven portal. The portal is the HOA website where residents can upload documents, request records, and check violation notices. I had uploaded a copy of my guest parking confirmation 2 weeks ago when Stephanie first hinted that I was using the spot too often. But when I logged in that night, the upload was gone. The file was not in my account, and there was no record that I had ever submitted it. The timestamp on the portal activity log showed a deletion at 6:15 that evening, the same hour Stephanie had emailed me about the tow warning. I took a screenshot of the deletion timestamp in the empty upload folder. Then I opened my sent email folder and found the confirmation receipt from the portal when I had first uploaded the file. The receipt had a different timestamp 2 weeks earlier, and it included a file reference number. printed both and put them in a folder. I did not know what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew I needed a paper trail because Stephanie had just shown me that digital records could vanish. The next morning, I ran into my neighbor Marcus at the mailbox cluster. He was pulling out a stack of junk mail and muttering under his breath. I asked him if he had ever had trouble with the portal, and he stopped mid-motion and looked at me like I had just asked him if he believed in ghosts. 3 years ago, he said, I got a violation notice for a trash can being out past 7 a.m. on a non-pickup day. I had a photo showing the can was inside my garage at 6:45, and I uploaded it to the portal the same day. 2 days later, the upload was gone, and Stephanie said I had never submitted proof. They fined me $200, and when I tried to fight it, the records custodian said the file was confidential and refused to let me photograph anything in the office. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Marcus was describing the exact same playbook. I asked him if he still had the original photo or the email receipt, and he shook his head. I got rid of it after I paid the fine, he said. I figured it was not worth the fight. But I never forgot it, because the notice they sent me had this weird template format, like it was copied from something else. All the fields were filled in by hand, but the printed part looked identical to every other notice I had ever seen from Stonehaven. I went back to my folder and pulled out the tow warning sticker. The printed section at the top had the Stonehaven logo and a block of text about fire lane restrictions. The handwritten part at the bottom said vehicle ID, date, time, and authorized by, all filled in with blue pen. I took a photo of it and sent it to Marcus, asking if his old notice had looked similar. He texted back 10 minutes later with a photo of a crumpled notice he had found in his garage storage bin. The printed section was identical, word for word. The handwritten section had the same blue pen, the same slanted capitals, and the same signature at the bottom. I called a local paralegal friend who helps me organize evidence packets for my job. Her name is Jenna, and she has a side practice helping residents fight HOA fines. I sent her the photos of both notices, the portal screenshots, and the email receipts. She called me back an hour later and said, "This is selective enforcement with a clear pattern. If she is deleting uploads to create a violation record, that is fraud. You need to file a records request with the board and demand a full audit of all violation notices issued under her name for the past 5 years. And you need to do it in writing with certified mail so she cannot claim you never asked." I drafted the request that afternoon. I kept it short and specific. I am requesting copies of all violation notices issued to my address and to Marcus Lawson at his address, along with a full log of portal activity for both accounts, including uploads, deletions, and administrative access. I also request copies of the templates used for violation notices and the signature authorization log for Stephanie Jackson. I printed 3 copies, sent one via certified mail to the board president, one to the management company, and kept one for my file. The receipt came back 5 days later with a delivery confirmation. 2 days after that, I got a call from the management company. The woman on the phone said her name was Linda, and she was the compliance liaison. She asked if I could come to the office to discuss my records request because there were some procedural issues that needed clarification. I said I could come that afternoon, and she gave me a time slot. The management office is in a strip mall on the east side of Milwaukee, tucked between a tax prep service and a nail salon. I walked in at 2 p.m., and Linda was waiting at the front desk with a file folder and a tired expression. She gestured to a chair and said, "Stephanie is not happy about your request. She says you are harassing her and that you are trying to interfere with her enforcement duties." I told her that a records request is not harassment, and she said you have a history of non-compliance. I pulled out my folder and handed Linda the portal screenshots, the email receipts, and the photos of the 2 notices. I walked her through the timeline, my upload, the deletion, the tow warning, Marcus's identical experience 3 years ago, and the matching template signatures. Linda stared at the pages for a long time, her expression shifting from skepticism to something closer to alarm. She said, "If this is accurate, we have a serious problem. I am going to need to escalate this to the board president and our legal team. In the meantime, I am suspending all pending fines on your account and Marcus's account pending a full review." I left the office feeling cautiously optimistic, but I knew Stephanie was not going to let this go quietly. That night, I got an email from her with the subject line "Final Notice of Noncompliance." The body of the email said I was being charged a $500 administrative fee for filing a frivolous records request, and that I was banned from all community amenities, including the pool, clubhouse, and guest parking, effective immediately. The email had a PDF attachment with a formal notice, printed on Stonehaven letterhead, signed by Stephanie, and dated that same day. I forwarded the email to Jenna and Linda within 5 minutes. Jenna called me back and said, "This is retaliation, and it is illegal under Wisconsin statute. She is trying to intimidate you into dropping the investigation. Do not respond to her directly. Forward everything to Linda and the board president and keep a log of every contact she makes. If she tries to enforce the amenity ban, document it and call the police if she physically blocks you." The next morning, I went to the clubhouse to test the ban. Stephanie was standing outside the front door with a clipboard and a handheld radio. When she saw me, she stepped directly in front of the entrance and said, "You are not authorized to be here. I have notified management, and if you do not leave immediately, I will call the police for trespassing." I pulled out my phone and started recording. I said, "I am a resident in good standing with no outstanding fines, and I have a right to access community amenities. This ban is retaliation for a lawful records request, and I am documenting this interaction." Stephanie keyed her radio and said, "This is Stephanie. I have a situation at the clubhouse. I need management on site immediately." Then she turned back to me and said, "I am calling management, and I am going to be dramatic about it. You think you are clever, but you have no idea how deep this goes. I have records going back 10 years, and every single one of them is airtight. You are going to lose, and when you do, I am going to make sure every resident knows you wasted their time and their money." A couple on a porch across the parking lot had stopped mid-conversation and were watching like it was a show. One of them pulled out a phone and started recording. Stephanie noticed and her voice got louder. She said, "This is what happens when you let people move into a community and think they can ignore the rules. He is a troublemaker, and he is trying to drag everyone down with him." I stood there and let her talk, because every word was evidence. Linda arrived 10 minutes later in a management company sedan. She parked in the fire lane, got out, and walked straight to Stephanie. She said, "Stephanie, you need to step aside. Mr. Carter is a resident, and he has full access to amenities pending the board review. You do not have the authority to ban anyone without board approval, and you certainly do not have the authority to issue fines for records requests." Stephanie tried to argue, but Linda cut her off. She said, "If you do not step aside right now, I am going to recommend that the board suspend your enforcement privileges pending a full investigation." Stephanie stepped aside, but she did not leave. She stood 10 feet away with her arms crossed and her radio in her hand, glaring at me as I walked into the clubhouse. I did not go inside for any particular reason. I just wanted to establish that the ban was unenforceable. I stayed for 5 minutes, took a photo of the empty meeting room for my records, and left. That afternoon, I got a call from the board president, a retired dentist named Greg. He said, "Alex, I want you to know that the board is taking your request seriously. We have asked Stephanie to provide a full accounting of her enforcement records, and we have engaged an independent auditor to review the portal logs. However, I need to ask you to be patient. This process takes time, and if we rush it, we risk making procedural errors that could compromise the investigation." I said, "Greg, I appreciate that, but Stephanie is escalating. She is sending retaliation notices, she is trying to ban me from amenities, and she is threatening to call the police. I need assurance that the board is going to hold her accountable if the audit confirms what I am alleging." Greg sighed and said, "I understand your frustration, but I cannot make promises about outcomes. What I can tell you is that if the audit finds evidence of misconduct, the board will take appropriate action. That is all I can commit to right now." I thanked him and hung up, but I knew appropriate action could mean anything from a slap on the wrist to a formal censure. I needed leverage, something that would force the board to act decisively. That is when I remembered the doorbell camera. My brother has a doorbell camera on his unit, which is 2 doors down from mine. The camera faces the parking lot and has a wide-angle view that covers the guest spots, the fire lane, and the mailbox cluster. I asked him if I could review the footage from the day of the tow warning, and he said yes. We sat down with his laptop and scrubbed through the video. At 5:43 p.m., Stephanie walked into frame carrying a stack of bright tow warning stickers. She looked around, walked over to my car, peeled off a sticker, and slapped it on the windshield. Then she walked 10 feet away, pulled out her phone, and took a photo of the car with the sticker visible. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. I exported the clip and saved it to 3 separate drives. Then I called Jenna and sent her the file. She watched it twice and said, "This is your trump card." She is on camera planting evidence to create a violation. That is fraud, and it is exactly the kind of proof you need to force the board to act. But do not release it yet. Hold it until the audit comes back, because if you play it too early, she will have time to spin a counter-narrative. You want to hit her with it when she has no room to maneuver. I nodded like I was losing, because I wanted her to get comfortable. I kept my head down, I stopped going to the clubhouse, and I let her think she had won. Meanwhile, Jenna and I built a full evidence packet, the portal screenshots, the email receipts, the matching notices, Marcus's testimony, the doorbell camera clip, and the certified mail delivery confirmations. We organized it into a timeline with clear headers and supporting exhibits. It was 60 pages long, and every page was a nail in Stephanie's coffin. The audit took 3 weeks. When the report came back, Linda called me and asked if I could come to a special board meeting at the clubhouse. She said the meeting was closed to the public, but the board had agreed to allow me and Marcus to attend as witnesses. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday, and she said I should bring any additional evidence I wanted to present. I showed up 15 minutes early with Jenna and the evidence packet. Marcus was already there, sitting in the back row with his arms crossed. The board members filtered in one by one. Greg, the president, a woman named Susan who handled landscaping, a younger guy named Darren who was the treasurer, and 2 other members I did not recognize. Stephanie was sitting at the side table with her own stack of files and a laptop. She did not look at me when I walked in. Greg called the meeting to order and said, "We are here tonight to review the findings of the independent audit and to hear testimony from Mr. Carter and Mr. Lawson regarding allegations of selective enforcement and procedural misconduct. Stephanie, you are here as a respondent, and you will have an opportunity to respond to the findings. Let us start with the auditor's report." Linda stood and handed out copies of the report. The executive summary was damning. The auditor had found that over the past 5 years, Stephanie had issued 143 violation notices, and in 37 cases, residents had uploaded proof of compliance to the portal within the required time frame, but the uploads had been deleted by an administrator account linked to S. Stephanie's credentials. In 21 of those cases, the residents had been fined anyway, and the fines had been paid under protest. The auditor estimated that Stonehaven had collected approximately $14,000 in potentially fraudulent fines during that period. The room was silent. Susan said, $14,000? Stephanie, how do you explain this? Stephanie stood and said, "This audit is flawed. The portal has technical issues and uploads fail all the time. I do not have the ability to delete files manually. That is a system-level function. If files were deleted, it was a server error, not misconduct. I have been enforcing the rules consistently for 5 years, and this is a witch hunt designed to undermine my authority." I raised my hand and Greg nodded. I stood and said, "I would like to submit additional evidence." I handed out copies of the doorbell camera screenshots showing Stephanie placing the sticker on my car. I said, "This footage shows Stephanie Jackson creating a violation by placing a tow warning sticker on my vehicle while it was parked in a legal guest spot. She then photographed the vehicle with the sticker in place and used that photo to justify calling a tow truck. This is not a technical error. This is deliberate fraud." The room erupted. Darren said, "Are you kidding me right now?" Stephanie stood and said, That footage is taken out of context. I was documenting a pre-existing violation. The sticker was already on the vehicle when I arrived. I said, the timestamp on the camera shows you arriving with a stack of stickers, placing one on the vehicle, and then taking the photo. There is no pre-existing violation. You created it. Greg held up his hand and said, Stephanie, sit down. We are going to review this evidence, and then we are going to vote on next steps. But I need you to understand that if this footage is authenticated, you are in serious legal jeopardy. Stephanie sat, but her face was bright red and her hands were shaking. Marcus stood and said, I want to add that I experienced the exact same thing 3 years ago. I uploaded proof of compliance, the file vanished, and I was fined. I have the email receipt and the original notice, and the signature matches the notices Mr. Carter provided. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern. Susan said, Stephanie, do you have an explanation for the matching signatures and the identical templates? Stephanie said, I use a standard template because it is efficient. That is not evidence of wrongdoing. Susan said, but the handwriting is identical across multiple notices issued years apart. That suggests you are pre-printing stacks of notices and filling them in as needed, which is exactly the kind of behavior that would support a fraud allegation. Greg called for a recess. The board members huddled in the corner for 10 minutes while Stephanie sat at her table staring at her laptop. When they returned, Greg said, the board has reviewed the evidence, and we have decided to take the following actions. First, Stephanie Jackson is suspended from all enforcement duties effective immediately. Second, we are referring this matter to our legal counsel to determine whether criminal charges are appropriate. Third, we are issuing refunds to all residents who were fined under circumstances matching the patterns identified in the audit. Fourth, we are implementing new portal safeguards to prevent unauthorized deletions. And fifth, we are engaging a mediator to facilitate a full review of our enforcement policies. Stephanie stood and said, this is a coup. You are letting one resident with a grudge destroy 5 years of work. I am calling management, and I am going to be dramatic about it. Greg said, Stephanie, you are out of order. This meeting is adjourned. Stephanie grabbed her laptop and her files and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. Jenna squeezed my shoulder and said, you did it. Marcus shook my hand and said, thank you. This should have happened 3 years ago. Linda walked over and said, I am sorry it took this long. We should have caught this sooner. I said, what happens now? Linda said, we file a formal report with the state, and they will determine whether to pursue charges. In the meantime, Stephanie is banned from all HOA property, and we are auditing every notice she issued. If we find more evidence of fraud, we will escalate. The board meeting ended at 9:30. I walked out into the parking lot, and the couple who had been watching from the porch earlier waved at me. The woman said, we recorded the whole thing at the clubhouse last week. If you need it for your case, we have it. I thanked her and said I might take her up on that. 2 days later, I got a call from Linda. She said, I wanted to give you an update. Stephanie submitted her resignation this morning, effective immediately. She also agreed to repay the $14,000 in question fines as part of a settlement to avoid criminal prosecution. The board is accepting her resignation and closing the internal investigation. However, the state is still reviewing the case, and they may pursue charges independently. I asked if Marcus was getting his refund, and Linda said yes. She said, everyone who was fined under the circumstances identified in the audit is getting a full refund, plus interest. We are also issuing a formal apology and updating our enforcement policies to include mandatory audit trails for all portal activity. I thanked her and hung up. I called Jenna and told her the news. She said, this is a clean win. You got the refunds, you got the policy changes, and you got her out of the HOA. That is as good as it gets without a lawsuit. But the story did not end there. 3 weeks later, I got a letter from the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection. The letter said they had received a complaint regarding Stonehaven Community Association and were opening an investigation into potential violations of the Wisconsin Condominium Ownership Act. The letter asked if I would be willing to provide testimony and evidence, and it included a case number and a contact name. I called the investigator, a woman named Officer Ramirez. She said, "We have been getting complaints about HOAs in Milwaukee for years, but most of them do not have enough documentation to pursue. Your case is different. You have a full audit, you have video evidence, and you have a pattern of behavior that spans multiple years. If we can prove that Stonehaven allowed this to happen without oversight, we can force them to implement mandatory compliance training and third-party auditing for all Wisconsin HOAs." I said, "What do you need from me?" She said, "I need copies of everything you submitted to the board, plus a written statement describing your experience and the impact on your household. I also need contact information for any other residents who were affected. If you can provide that, we can move forward." I spent the next week pulling together the packet. I included the portal screenshots, the doorbell camera footage, the matching notices, Marcus's testimony, the audit report, and a 3-page statement describing how Stephanie's actions had nearly caused me to miss my brother's medical appointments and had created a hostile living environment. I sent it all via certified mail, and I got a delivery confirmation 2 days later. A month after that, I got another call from Officer Ramirez. She said, "I wanted to let you know that we have completed our investigation, and we are issuing a formal finding of selective enforcement and procedural misconduct. Stonehaven is being required to implement the following changes: mandatory third-party audits every 2 years, a resident-accessible complaint portal with full transparency, a cap on administrative fees, and a prohibition on retaliation for records requests. They are also being fined $10,000 for failing to maintain adequate oversight." I said, "What about Stephanie?" Ramirez said, "We referred her case to the Milwaukee County District Attorney. They are reviewing it for potential criminal charges related to fraud and theft by deception. I cannot comment on the status of that investigation, but I can tell you that they are taking it seriously." I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the wall. It was over. Stephanie was gone, the fines were refunded, the policies were changed, and the state was holding the HOA accountable. I had won, but it had taken months of stress, documentation, and fights just to prove that I had been telling the truth from the start. A week later, the board held a special meeting to announce the changes. Greg stood at the front of the room and said, "We want to acknowledge that we failed in our oversight responsibilities, and we apologize to all residents who were harmed by Stephanie Jackson's actions. We are committed to rebuilding trust, and we are implementing the reforms required by the state, plus additional safeguards recommended by our legal counsel. We are also establishing a resident advisory committee to provide input on enforcement policies, and we are inviting volunteers to serve." I did not volunteer. I had spent enough time fighting the HOA, and I did not want to spend the next 5 years sitting in meetings. But Marcus volunteered, and so did the couple from the porch and a few other residents who had been fined under questionable circumstances. They formed a coalition, and within 6 months, they had pushed through additional reforms: a requirement that all enforcement actions be reviewed by a second board member, a public log of all violations with anonymized case summaries, and a formal appeals process with a neutral arbitrator. Stephanie never returned to Stonehaven. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to a different neighborhood and was working as a property manager for a small apartment complex. I did not follow up. I did not care what she was doing as long as she was not doing it to me. The refund checks arrived in the mail 2 months after the board meeting. I got a check for $200, which was the amount Stephanie had tried to fine me for the fabricated fire lane violation. Marcus got a check for $200 as well, plus interest. The checks came with a letter from Greg that said, "On behalf of the Stonehaven Community Association Board of Directors, we apologize for the inconvenience and distress caused by the actions of our former fines coordinator. We are committed to ensuring that this never happens again." I cashed the check and put the letter in my evidence folder. I kept the folder in a filing cabinet in my home office, along with all the other documents from the case. I did not think I would ever need them again, but I wanted to have them just in case Stephanie decided to come back and try something new. She never did, but But 6 months after the state investigation closed, I got a call from a journalist at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He said he was writing a story about HOA enforcement abuses in Wisconsin, and he had heard about my case from a source at the state. He asked if I would be willing to go on the record. I said yes. The story ran 2 weeks later on the front page of the local section. The headline was HOA Coordinator Resigns After Fraud Investigation Reveals Pattern of Fake Violations. The article included interviews with me, Marcus, Linda, Officer Ramirez, and Greg. It described the doorbell camera footage, the audit findings, and the state reforms. It also included a comment from Stephanie, who said she had made procedural errors but denied any intentional wrongdoing. The story got picked up by a few local news stations, and I did a short TV interview where I walked through the timeline and showed the doorbell camera clip. The clip went viral on social media, and within a week, it had been viewed over 1 million times. People were furious. The comments section was full of HOA horror stories, and dozens of people reached out to me asking for advice on how to fight their own associations. I did not become an activist. I did not start a nonprofit or a podcast. I just went back to my life, my job, and taking care of my brother. But I did write a guide, a short PDF that explained how to document HOA violations, how to file records requests, and how to escalate complaints to the state. I posted it on a few community forums, and it got downloaded thousands of times. A year later, I got a letter from the board. It was an invitation to the annual meeting along with a ballot for the upcoming board elections. One of the candidates was Marcus, who was running for president on a platform of transparency and accountability. I voted for him, and he won. At his first meeting as president, he announced that Stonehaven was adopting a resident Bill of Rights, which included protections against retaliation, mandatory notice timelines, and a cap on fines. I did not go to the meeting, but I watched the video recording later. At the end of his remarks, Marcus said, "I want to thank Alex Carter for standing up when it mattered. A lot of people were afraid to challenge Stephanie, and a lot of people got hurt because of it. Alex did not back down, and because of that, we are all better off." The room applauded, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I did not realize had been tight. The funny thing is, Stephanie is the one who taught me how to fight. She thought she could intimidate me with her clipboard and her megaphone and her threats. She thought she could delete my files and make the problem go away. But every time she escalated, she gave me more evidence. Every time she moved the goalposts, she proved the pattern. And when she finally tried to plant a violation on camera, she handed me the smoking gun. If you want to hear more stories about HOA accountability and standing up to neighborhood power trips, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The board meeting where they reviewed Stephanie's stopwatch and ruler routine turned into the funniest moment of the whole case. One of the board members asked her to demonstrate how she had been measuring parking violations, and she pulled out her stopwatch and a tape measure and started pacing off distances in the meeting room. Someone in the audience started laughing, and then someone else joined in, and within 30 seconds, the whole room was chuckling. Stephanie tried to power through it, but her face was bright red, and she finally sat down and refused to continue. That is the moment I knew the board was not going to back her anymore. You cannot take someone seriously when the whole room is laughing at their props. The final board vote was unanimous. Stephanie was formally censured, removed from all committees immediately, and banned from holding any HOA position for 5 years. The state procedure complaint that I filed forced the HOA to respond within 30 days, and their response included a full admission of the enforcement failures and a commitment to implement the reforms. Karen's own selective enforcement got documented in the minutes, and those minutes are now public record. Anyone who searches for Stonehaven Community Association can find the meeting packet online, complete with the audit summary and the board resolution. The HOA agreed to mediation with a neutral third party, and that mediation resulted in a settlement where every affected resident got a refund, an apology, and a commitment that the new policies would be enforced consistently. The mediator also recommended that the board conduct annual training on Wisconsin HOA law, and the board agreed. I ran into Stephanie one more time, about a year after everything ended. I was at a hardware store on the north side, and I saw her in the paint aisle. She saw me too, and for a second I thought she was going to say something. But she just turned and walked away, and I did the same. I did not need closure from her. I had already gotten everything I needed. My brother asked me once if I regretted going after Stephanie so hard. He said, "You spent months on this, and you could have just paid the fine and moved on." I told him that it was never about the money. It was about the principle. It was about the fact that she had been running this scam for years, and nobody had stopped her because they were afraid or tired or did not think it was worth the fight. I was not going to be one of those people. The tow warning stickers are still in my file cabinet, along with the notices, the screenshots, and the doorbell camera footage. I do not look at them very often, but every once in a while, when I hear someone complaining about their HOA, I pull out the folder and remind myself that it is possible to win. It is not easy, and it is not fast, but if you have the evidence and the patience and the willingness to push back, you can force the system to work the way it is supposed to. And that is the lesson I want people to take from this story. Do not let someone in a cheap badge and a megaphone tell you that the rules do not apply to them. Do not let them delete your files or move the goalposts or threaten you into silence. Document everything. Build your paper trail, and when the time comes, hit them with the truth so hard that they cannot spin their way out of it. I still live in Stonehaven. I still see the clubhouse and the mailbox cluster and the parking lot where Stephanie tried to tow my car. But now, when I walk through the neighborhood, I do not feel like I am being watched or targeted or set up. I just feel like I am home, in a place where the rules are fair and the enforcement is transparent and the people in charge actually have to answer for their actions. That is all I ever wanted. I will see you in the next upload.